Everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Where it's really wonderful to see so many smiling faces here with us, and during this very unusual time, maybe one of the small bright spots that have come from this is this opportunity to connect in a different way, and also to spend more time in nature. For me, I've been trying to squeeze in more walks and hikes, trying to get out and find a little peace at the end of the day that, we're all on top of each other with school and work during the day. So the evenings are a really nice time for us to just get out. And like many of you, I find so much peace when I'm out in nature. It reminds me of what's important, and it makes me feel whole again. So reading about nature also can have this same effect. And this certainly felt this way as I read your story. The early descriptions of the ficus and the banyan tree really brought me back to my own youth. I grew up in the Pacific Islands, and the ficus tree was the tree that I used to run away to. This was the tree that when I got angry at my mom, I would tell her I was running away to the tree, and I would get lost in the roots and the branches. And by the time I got home, all was forgiven. So, I think it upheld its name as being a tree that keeps the spirits. So also the descriptions that I read about the Western cedar and the Douglas fir, those descriptions really spoke to me and really took me back to a time when I was a forest technician in the Pacific Northwest just shortly after graduate school, and really reminded me of that period of time, and really thinking about the ways that trees have just intersected my own life. And so we really felt that this was an opportunity for us to share this story, but also learn from all of you about how this book has really resonated with you, touched you in different ways, made you think differently. So at Big Sur Land Trust, we're finding new opportunities to really connect. And, this is one of the ways that we're doing this. This is the first time we've ever done, anything like this. And so we're excited. We had, lots of people sign up right away, and we're hoping that this is a good experience for everyone. I wanted to just introduce some of my colleagues that will be joining us tonight. So we have Nikki Nedeff, who's the Associate Director of Conservation. She's been with the Land Trust for a number of years. She focuses on our acquisitions. She's an amazing ecologist and botanist, a local girl who was born and raised in Carmel Valley. So she's joining with us tonight, as well as Patrick Riparetti, who is our Stewardship Director. And Patrick has been with the Land Trust for about 5 years. And then we also have a special guest, Nadia Hamey, who is a registered professional forester, and she has done some amazing work with us out of the Big Sur Land Trust. We're so grateful to have her expertise and her talent out on the land and with us on this call tonight. We're also going to have a bit of our staff. You'll notice several Big Sur Land Trust staff, and they will be part of the breakout groups, helping to facilitate the different smaller group discussions. And then we'll all come back together, and we'll hear a little bit more from Nikki and from Nadia. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to share a little bit about the Middeldorf Preserve, and in particular, the dewing tree, also known as the mother tree at Middeldorf.
Right, thank you. Hi, everyone. So back in March of 2019, a small team of researchers led by a man named Steve Sillett, who's a world-renowned, very prestigious old-growth forest canopy researcher. He comes from the Humboldt State University, and he came to the Middledorf Preserve to climb and study the large redwood tree next to the lodge. And his team has been asking questions about redwoods and giant sequoias for decades, and they've been building this data set that spans across the entire range of the redwood with different precipitation patterns and elevations and stand characteristics and distance from the coast. And they've been looking through time to develop insights about these trees and how they are responding to climate change and drought and fire and logging. And they're doing that so that we can improve how we manage and conserve these forests. So they're asking basic questions like how big are these trees, which is more complicated than it sounds, and how old are these trees? How many leaves do they have? What factors affect their productivity? Or in other words, how the tree is doing, and what stories can they tell us about the landscape through time, which can then shed light on our relationship with the land. And so early one morning in March, the team set out to Middledorf, and they used a modified arborist climbing technique that they pioneered to venture high into these trees and this tree at Middledorf that doesn't damage the tree, and it's relatively safe, I'd say. But they go up there to take these crown measurements and core samples of the tree at certain intervals. And what they found was that tree is at least 1,286 years old, that they dated the trunk back to the year 1197, making it the oldest redwood tree south of the Santa Cruz Mountains that they've ever found. So just to give you some perspective on that, what was happening at that time when that was a little sprout was that the Mongol Empire was founded by Genghis Khan, or in Europe, it was the High Middle Ages. They also found that the crown occupies over 16,500 cubic meters of space, which makes it the largest tree south of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So if you added up 600 school buses, that would be about the volume you'd get of that single tree. They found that it was about 224 feet tall, that it was about 15.5 feet in diameter at its base, there are over 500 million needles. So if you took all those needles and you spread them in an even layer out on a floor, it would cover about 1.2 acres of surface area. And so, that can kind of give you a sense of how much capacity that tree has to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere and hold that into its body. They also found evidence that the tree was spike climbed back in 1923, and someone had very carefully and expertly climbed the tree and removed dozens of dead branches from the crown, which was fascinating. They discovered with the core samples that the tree was particularly impervious to recent droughts and the Cervantes fire that scorched its base. It remained steady, so Steve's research demonstrates that these old trees have more of an outsized role when it comes to carbon sequestration, and they're consistently making more wood year over year when compared to second growth forests, which are forests that have regrown from a previous timber harvest. And so the rate of productivity doesn't decline as the tree ages. In fact, in most cases, it keeps increasing as the tree grows in size. And that's right up until its eventual death, which I found interesting. And there's a lot more to this research, but identifying these trends and deepening our understanding of the redwood growth potential in forests of these different ages and different levels of disturbance is really exciting for improving the stewardship of these trees. And so many of you have probably spent some time at the Middledorf Preserve, but the next time you're out there standing under that giant tree, I just say that think about all the fires and all the storms and the wild things and the people and the dramas, the stories, and now you that it has experienced, and reflect on how that makes you feel differently about your own life.
Thank you, Patrick. They're truly amazing, and it's such a gift to be able to have such an impressive tree here at Middledorf. So thank you. We're going to invite Nikki and Nadia, and we'll have a couple of questions. I'll be facilitating and just asking them a couple of questions so that they can provide their own reflections around the book. So the first question that I have is that, there's so many different storylines in the book. Which one spoke to you and why? And I'm just, and this is also an opportunity for you to share your overall thoughts about the book as well. So.
Well, I'm happy to. As I mentioned in our breakout group, at first I didn't understand why there were so many disparate stories at the beginning. They made no sense. They weren't related to one another. And I found it kind of challenging to get through the first section. I kind of didn't like it, actually. And then when I started reading the next section called STEM, I thought, these stories are being woven together in a way that I'm really curious to see, what happens. Of all the initial stories, I think being a plant enthusiast, the one that resonated with me most was the story about Dr. Patricia Westerford, and how as a young person, she had trouble in her societal groups and with her peers. She was really mentored by her father, who had a deep understanding of the natural environment, which she then internalized and developed as she aged and as she went to school and pursued a degree in forestry, which for a woman, as Nadia may be able to tell us, is sort of a challenge in some circles. So her story resonated with me in that she did this really pioneering, intuitive, but data-driven research that was dismissed by her academic peers, but then over time was vindicated and was seen as really something revolutionary in the understanding of how ecosystems worked, that they are connected, that there are relationships. And in taking it one step further, those relationships mirror our societal connections and mirror our dependencies on one another, as well as our dependencies on the natural environment. So over time, as I kept reading the book on and on and on, I really began to kind of groove on these connections. And gee, I wanted to see where it all went. So anyway, that was sort of my what resonated with me was her story. Although, and spoiler alert, I didn't understand why at the very end she chose to do the things that she chose after the lecture that she was giving to the group of very high level people at Stanford. But I won't spoil it for those who haven't read the book. I just didn't understand the ending. So, and I'm happy to take questions later, but.
Thank you, Nikki. How about you, Nadia? What character really resonated with you? And also, if you want to provide your overall impressions of the book, that would be great as well.
Well, it's really a tough one. I've thought about that a lot. And Patricia pulled my heartstrings because of how connected she is to trees and how enticing that is. But big picture, multiple stories that told the tale of like rampant clear cutting in the Pacific Northwest. There's some passages where Dougie observes the clear cutting from the air and how extensive it is. And I was born and raised on Vancouver Island and witnessed just mass liquidation of old growth there and clear cutting from the shoreline to the ridge. And my dad was a forester and my mom was a habitat protection officer for the Ministry of Environment. And I used to participate in roadblocks where people would chain themselves to trees. And my parents, as I was growing up, said, you really need to use your brain and not your body to have an everlasting impact on this, land use and this debate. And I set about to study forestry, and I came to California to study at UC Berkeley because I identified it as a really progressive forestry program. And, the rest is history. But the trees, so when I was in school, Julia Butterfly Hill was in, old growth redwood trees on Pacific Lumber Company property, and the property was part of a big junk bonds transfer to Maxam Corporation. And, so all of those storylines about tree sitters and, arcane logging practices were probably the part that I carry with me the most from the book.
Just to follow up, it was really interesting to me that the forestry perspective was one of seeing trees as commodities. It was an economic business. These were things that were going to generate income. Whereas in the more conservation-minded circle, the trees were seen as part of our natural capital, part of our endowment. Something that we recognize now. We're reducing the principle of our endowment, and that's not a good thing.
If you guys had to choose a second sort of storyline or character, like your next favorite, and what part of the story would that be?
Well, I really found the character of Olivia Vandergriff intriguing. She was not a good person until she died and was essentially resurrected. And that was a transformative experience for her. And during that time, while she was, not alive, something happened to her. And we have no clue how to really describe what that sort of transformative experience can be like, because none of us have experienced that. And I found that intriguing, that she really went 180 out and became a totally different person. And maybe she really did indeed experience things that spoke to her or that suggested to her different changes or changes in her pattern of behavior. But her persona also was intriguing to me because I wondered, was she the sister of Adam who was lost, disappeared when she went to college? Was she a sort of a replacement figure for that lost sister? And also for the child, perhaps the daughter that Ray and Dorothy could never have. So anyway, her persona was very intriguing to me on so many different levels. And her storyline was just, was something that, being a charismatic person who people couldn't really understand, she brought people into her world and influenced their activities in ways that are very interesting. Anyway.
I like that answer.
She was different.
Yeah. So another passage of the book, we talked about this a little bit in our breakout session, but that the Iowa family with the chestnut tree, and I picture that tree, and the story of the generations taking photos of that tree inspired me to start up a photo journal of a tree, and so I've been documenting a cherry tree through the seasons since I read the book, and I think it's a really cool concept to watch these beings that have such a long life history kind of go through the seasons and change. And if you don't do something so methodical as take photos of them, it's hard to even witness and see the change. So that's kind of a cool exercise, and another just kind of mental image that stays with me because it was resounding.
So there's a question from one of our participants, and the question is, which is your favorite tree and why? So each of you can have a moment to respond to that.
Oh boy, that's tough. I like all trees. Probably, I would say that my favorite trees of all are deciduous ones. I really like cottonwoods, black cottonwoods in particular, along the Carmel River. As a graduate student, I studied riparian or streamside plant ecology, and really have an affinity for the trees that grow along rivers. They tell us so much about their natural environment and are indicative of certain things that have happened in their natural environment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be growing there. So deciduous trees and probably cottonwoods are my favorite trees.
Did you have a favorite tree in the book?
In the book, I wasn't really reading it for the individual trees. I was really reading it more because the trees were emblematic of environments, of ecosystems. They were habitats for other plants and animals. A habitat, literally the definition of that word, is a place where an organism has a home. So I was thinking of the trees as being sort of the emblems of whole ecosystems, and certainly the mimas tree, the giant old growth redwood that Maidenhair Watchtower stayed in for 10 months. That's an amazing story to me. But that one, of all the trees in the book, was a habitat to so many different things and was a component of a much greater ecosystem that's very complicated and interdependent. So that one probably.
Nadia, do you have a favorite tree?
Well, there are many vying. It's hard to beat a redwood. I came to Santa Cruz. I've been here for 18 years practicing forestry in redwood because they are awe-inspiring. And their life history, the way that they sprout, how amazingly resilient they are. They're hexaploid. They have 6 sets of chromosomes and are so adaptable and resilient to all types of climatic events and fires, and so they get to be so old and so huge. It has to be redwood for me.
I've got to interject one really cool thing about redwoods. Other trees do this too, but redwoods are just so capable of maintaining their aliveness, maintaining their capability to grow. You can cut a redwood and the sprouts along the perimeter of where the trunk used to be will grow. And that essentially is what second growth forest is all about. So the tree doesn't die necessarily when you cut it. Of course, the roots are still alive. And the burl and parts of the trunk that remain are still alive. So they're capable of regenerating, even though the mother tree or the original is cut down. But that's a cool thing.
So Nadia, you touched a bit about this in your own experience. But I'm wondering about, it'd be interesting to hear both of your sort of personal perspective of the book as it relates to your own experience in this type of work in forestry and in conservation. And how sort of trees shaped your career, if you will.
Now, I go first.
Okay, sure. So, like I said, I started out kind of my teenage years as a bit of, an eco-warrior. And throughout my education, studying forestry and plant ecology, I guess I lost a little of my idealism about, all black and white situations with forest management. I am a very strong advocate of protection of old growth, and I believe that you can do sustainable forest management, and that old growth should be protected through the process. And this book kind of highlights the urgent nature of protecting that attribute of forests so that it's not lost, because it's something that can't be recreated. And that's kind of what guides my whole profession. I worked for Big Creek Lumber Company for 10 years because I felt like they did really responsible management. But about 6 years ago, I went out on my own as a consulting forester because it gives me the latitude to work on forest restoration and transitioning some of our really damaged lands or cut over second growth forests into having more old growth character and function over time. And so I kind of felt aligned with some of the philosophies of some of the characters as they converged on that point. It's complicated.
It is complicated. And when I see trees in a natural environment, for me, the trees are perhaps the signature component of ecosystems, of vegetation types. And they're part of a very complex and interrelated network of organisms, some that we don't even see underground. And, it's that classic adage of you only see the trees, you don't see the forest, or you don't see the forest for the trees, unless we're in an urban or landscape setting where there are specimen trees that are planted and nurtured for very specific horticultural reasons. Trees are components of environments and work together with all the other plants and organisms in their very complex interrelated networks. So trees for me in my career have just been the signature plants of ecosystems and indicators of certain types of habitats. And I try to have the perspective of conserving not just the trees, but the whole assemblage of organisms that are associated with those trees as indicators of certain habitats. So, I taught for 15 years at Cal State Monterey Bay and continue to give workshops and, occasional classes and whatnot. And I always really strive to impart the message that it's a complex of plants, and trees are just part of that complex of plants.
Earlier, we heard from Patrick as he talked about the Dewing tree at Middledorf Preserve. Both you and Nadia have had lots of experiences out on Big Sur Land Trust properties. Are there, certain experiences that really stand out for you, experiences that have made you feel perhaps maybe really connected to the lands in a different way?
One of the really momentous, working on Glen Devon Ranch was my first to embark on eucalyptus removal for native habitat restoration reasons. Was my first relationship with Big Sur Land Trust, and what a heroic effort. And following that, the Silveranas fire, having a place where the equipment had a base right on the ridge road in the midst of what where the eucalyptus forest had been. I think what an amazing transition that area has gone through. I really note the spires of dead redwoods that had been completely engulfed by the eucalyptus and were liberated when the eucalyptus were cut, and now that area could come back to the variety of native vegetation types. We can help it along. And so the Silveranas fire kind of coming and having that be a strategic fuel reduction zone, that was one of the things that I celebrate about accomplishments I've been involved in at Big Sur Land Trust. And one of the things I work on in my career is reintroducing natural fire to the landscape. And so the Silveranas fire, on the flip side, had really positive impacts on the fire-dependent plant community in areas where it burned at Middledorf. The botanical diversity that it was really hot, and some trees succumbed to that extreme fuel loading, but the seed bed was raring to go with fire-following plants, and the diversity of that and the kind of species assemblage that comes after a fire is really exciting. So that kind of event and the culmination across multiple Big Sur Land Trust properties was, I guess, one of my favorite things to think about relative to those properties. I think they're both in good shape and ever improving.
Something that's really interesting to think about is that fire suppression, particularly in areas that were logged, like Middledorf, which has a long history of being logged, fire suppression led to really dense growth of redwoods. So there's this phrase called restoration thinning. You don't think about going back into an area to log to help it be restored, but that's a happening thing. And actually, Nadia and Patrick, maybe you can talk about the EQIP grant and what that might result in at Middledorf.
Yeah, that's a partnership with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to implement some of the restoration objectives that are outlined in the management plan for Middledorf. And redwoods are very shade tolerant, and so they will eke it out in the understory and be very dense and experience crown recession, where their lower branches die off because of all the competition of sometimes there's 30% more redwood trees in a second growth stand than there were in the pre-harvest stand, because they sprout in such great numbers. And so each of those trees I think of them like straws drinking up the groundwater, and they're all kind of competing with one another for a limited amount of resources. And it kind of causes them to have a tuft of crown at the top and not be at their full photosynthetic capability. And so one of the restoration treatments that we can implement to both reduce fire hazard and the ladder fuels that cause wildfire to climb up from the brush into the tree canopies, although redwoods are very resilient to that and can resprout even if all of their branches get completely consumed, we can help reduce the fire severity of natural wildfires that come through by doing this restoration thinning. And that makes each of the individual redwoods that are thinned around have more resources, and they're able to withstand, drier drought conditions for prolonged periods and these types of extreme wildfires that we have because we've been practicing fire suppression for so long. So that restoration thinning fuel reduction project will be implemented in the next year or over the summer season at Middledorf, primarily along some of the main roads, but in some of the highest priority areas of dense second growth that lend itself to that.
Thanks for sharing about that, Nadia. So at this time, we can open it up to questions that other folks might have, or just things they want to raise about the book and want to talk about, something that we might not have gotten to that you'd love to hear more about or hear other perspectives on.
So I've got a couple questions that came through in the chat that I'm just going to make sure that we answer. So I've got one. Terry was interested, and this is for Patrick or anyone that would like to answer. When we learned about the Middledorf tree, the dewing tree, how does the size compare to the trees in Santa Cruz? Is there one similar up in Santa Cruz? Does anyone know if that?
Yeah, Nadia probably knows more. What I know is that there's what is the tree called? The mother of the forest tree. Do you know about this one, Nadia? I think it's the tallest tree. It's about 330 feet tall. So
Hyperion is in Humboldt County, the tallest.
So then we also had a question here from Terry. Terry is interested, Nikki, or Nadia actually, when we talked about the fires. So do the morel mushrooms emerge here in the growing season after a fire, was the question.
Ooh, I am not a mushroom person because they scare me. I've purposefully not tried to learn too much about mushrooms, just because I know if you make a mistake, it can be a problem. But maybe Nadia or someone else in our listening audience knows that.
I have seen morels. Most of my experience with the aftermath of fire is in Santa Cruz County, where I'm kind of based. And the Lockheed fire in 2009 burned about 8,000 acres across a couple of properties that I've worked on in the past. And morels were ubiquitous in a certain ecotone for 1 year after the fire. And I kind of expected them to reemerge again, and it was a one season thing. So the ecotone that they were most prevalent in was stressed redwood on the fringe of its range. So you kind of have the dank zone redwood forest along the creeks, which grades out as especially on south facing slopes. As you get out of the drainages, it becomes more mixed with other hardwoods and in some places fir. And at the very edge of the redwood range, of the redwood kind of transitioning into chaparral, is where morels were prolific. And actually there were these people, like the Mushroom King from Oregon came and, were trespassing and looking for these mushrooms because they apparently knew the ecological niche where morels abound after fire. But it was very illuminating where they came. And redwood seedlings were also prolific in that zone. Redwood hardly ever or they're very much less likely to regenerate from seed than they are from sprout. But kind of on the edge of their range, I find almost redwood forest expansion after a fire, along with the morels.
And then we have another question from Catherine. Nice to see you, Catherine. What message did the book leave you with? It can be a bit bleak at times, so I'm curious what your overall takeaway is.
My takeaway was a positive one. My takeaway was that gradually, slowly, people are beginning to understand that we are, as a society, as a world of different cultures, entirely dependent on our natural environment. And we're beginning to get that. We have very little time. This is not an existential question. It's an immediate need. and changing climates, changing, patterns of disease. Still, I think in a positive way, the book made me feel that with stories like the ones that are being told by this fictional author, we're starting to actually begin to understand we need to pay attention to what the world is telling us and take action. So my feeling was a positive one.
I guess my feeling is positive. It's tumultuous also. And I listened to this book versus reading it. And I had to listen to it a couple of times in order to make sense of it all and have it all sink in. And after the first time, I didn't really like it. And after the second time, when I was able to grasp more of the nuances and the connections of the stories and kind of remove myself from, when people fall out of trees and get paralyzed, like it was violent in many ways. And the second time I kind of focused on the environmental ethic message more, and I liked it a lot better.
We have another question here. Actually, it's for Jeannette. So Jeannette, you mentioned earlier your work in American Samoa Islands for some time. Could you share a bit about your experience with trees there, and if there are cultural values are different with regards to trees?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I worked for the Community and Natural Resources Division out of the American Samoa Community College, which has a USDA research grant station. And the work that I did there was really focused around agroforestry, and forestry in the Samoan Islands is very different because we don't have large plantations of trees. Everything is community forestry, if you will. And part of that is because we have really complex agroforestry systems that are that people cultivate for a variety of uses. And so instead of, say, just having all of your timber grown in one place, you have all your food, your medicine, your timber for construction, your fuel, just all the uses that one household would need. They're grown and with fruit trees and timber trees and everything in these sort of multi-layered canopies that are right outside your door in your backyard, that if you need something to eat, you harvest it outside, right outside. And if you need wood to build yourself a little fale, which is like a traditional little open air house where you just step outside and you cut what you need. And of course it's a tropic, so everything comes back in 6 months and is raging, but you need some papayas, well, they're right there too, or bananas, whatever you need. So in that way, the systems are really different. Now we do have not traditional, but native old growth forests there, lowland forests and montane forests, which are a little bit different. And even though there are threats mostly due to natural disasters such as hurricanes, and people clear areas of land to build like a coconut or a banana plantation or something. A lot of the forests, you don't see, the forests are the place where the spirits live traditionally. And so you don't have people just going out and wandering out there or even really hiking around, because that would be viewed as a little bit strange there, unless you're hunting pig or something, with a group of people. But, it is a little bit different in terms of the relationship that people have, with their immediate environment, in some ways, I guess, because it's still very much a part of how you eat every day, how you get by every day. So that's been my experience, I guess, in the Samoan Islands, and I really miss it. So I get to go back every once in a while. We have a family house there, but it's I miss the tropical rains. I miss how quickly the sky will turn dark within a couple of minutes, and the sky will just open up, and it's just pounding. For us, 180 inches in a year is a dry year. So my family lives on. So so I miss lots of rain and lots of sunshine. And
thank you. So just because I'm careful with our time, so we're getting kind of close to the end, but we have just a few more really great questions. And it was in the Overstory. People have very different backgrounds, felt a strong connection to the trees they knew. As we think about the need for widespread advocacy and activism to protect our environment, what possibilities might trees, stories about trees, research about the role that trees play in a particular ecosystem play in mobilizing support and dialogue about protecting the earth?
And one thing I've got to say is we can blind people with data and more data, but what really resonates are stories. It's that people can relate to. And I think the stories are what mobilize people and mobilize their interest, their curiosity. And as they become more curious and start to learn things, then they begin to care. And there's a trajectory there that galvanizes people to take action.
I think about this need to have this, collective narrative. It feels like there have been times in our past that, we've all sort of rallied around something that really resonated us. I mean, I can think about, for me, I'm a child of the 70s, so I think about the one that was the crying Indian that, all of us saw that commercial back then. Of course, now we know he wasn't Indian, and then there was, Silent Spring and Rachel Carlson's work early on. And so I feel like there have been iterations of them. And I think what's really needed now is a collective narrative that speaks to a whole new generation. I guess I'm thinking in terms of Americans, but a new generation that recognizes a message that can be much more inclusive and having the right messengers out there as well. I feel like that's an important piece for our time moving forward in terms of something that can help mobilize people to action.
So then we have a question from George. With the potential negative impacts of climate change on the range of the coastal redwood populations, what changes in the forest canopies do you expect to take place as the redwood populations decline?
Well, so several projects that I work on, including some of the work we're about to embark on at Middledorf. I do similar styles of work with Save the Redwoods League, Peninsula Open Space Trust, and Semper Virens Fund. And I think the best way to kind of help our redwood forests thrive in the future is to set them up to be as resilient as possible. And one of the ways is identifying kind of a future condition that mimics historic conditions prior to clear cutting and the initiation of fire suppression. And in some ways we can implement management that is non-destructive to set the forest up to be more akin to that condition, fewer trees per acre, so that each individual tree is as healthy as possible and can withstand droughts and extreme severity wildfires. So far, some of the studies that the Redwoods and Climate Change Initiative has presented has shown that the growth rate of redwood has increased, in recent times, as a result of our shifting climate. And that may be fleeting because it's due to things like increased sunlight, and that also results in a reduced fog layer in certain parts of the redwood band that really, rely on that moisture source to sustain them through the year. So it's really it's a complicated question, but the way I have kind of learned from some of the scientific research out there, one way to possibly address it is to make each individual tree in a forest as healthy as possible. And by reducing competition, we can kind of enhance those conditions for individual trees. Right. I think what the types of huge fires that we've had can sometimes burn so extremely that the seed bank is burned up, it's fried, and the seed source can be a distance away. So species shifts as a result of that away from trees to more brushy species has been something transpiring in the Sierras.
What's really important to recognize is that as climatic conditions change, plants and animals need places to go where they can find conditions that sustain them. And it's really, really vital to maintain open spaces and conserved areas, places where natural processes continue to do what they do over time, so that there are places for plants and animals to go, to occupy niches that are good for them. And their environments may be changing around them, but we need to maintain open spaces and conserved areas so that plants can migrate and animals can migrate into those areas to maintain their populations. So keeping the forests healthy, keeping habitats healthy, but also offering them a place to go, to move to.
So I think that's a great segue into this next question. And I think Nadia might have touched on it a bit, and you as well, Nikki, but I'm just going to ask it to be sure that I honor this question and we get it out. So Marie is asking, you spoke of the project of thinning some of the redwoods at Middledorf. I'm wondering about any planting projects and where those redwood seedlings could be planted, and what's the balance between thinning and replanting?
Ooh, that's a Nadia question.
Well, Middledorf has some really interesting conditions going on, partly as a result of rampant sudden oak death. It's one of the hardest hit places that I've seen in California in terms of tan oak mortality from sudden oak death. And so managing these forests in the face of sudden oak death, which, research, it's really interesting with the sod blitz, and there's new knowledge of how sod is impacting trees and forests every year presented at the sod blitz, which is a cool citizen science endeavor. One of the things that we think about a lot on Middledorf is, so one of the things that the scientists say about sod is that potentially there may be resistant tan oaks out there, but there may not. And in the future, if sudden oak death continues to be the plague that it is, we may not have tree stature tan oaks in the future, because if a tan oak dies from sudden oak death, the sprouts have the disease, they grow up to be saplings, and they succumb to the mortality from the disease. And so planting is one of the things that comes into play when we're working in severely impacted sudden oak death stands. And there we have the opportunity to increase the presence of redwood, which is one of the best, carbon sequestration species out there, because it can hold on to the carbon for so long and is resilient to many of the factors that would cause a tree to die and then release its carbon slowly from decay. And so planting in areas where we're removing sudden oak death, dead trees is a major part of the strategy. But planting is not so much a part in the areas where we're thinning, because there the goal overall is to reduce the number of trees per acre to what would have been historically.
Okay, so this will be, I think, our last topic, since we are running long, but I just wanted to honor a comment here that I loved seeing come across. We need to get our kids into the forest. They won't protect what they don't know and love. And then it was followed up with a question about taking kids out onto the land. And so I just wanted to take a moment, and I'm going to throw it to Todd and put you on the spot here, our director of outdoor programs, because we do in fact have programs where we take youth out to Glen Devon Ranch and Middledorf. So I think it would be nice if you could share a little bit about that, Todd.
Yeah, my thoughts go to the hundreds of youth, of teenagers from throughout the Salinas Valley, from Castroville down to King City and the Peninsula too, that come and experience our youth programs each spring at Mark's Ranch and each summer at Glen Devon Ranch. And my first thoughts go to the majority of these young teens and high school students that come to Glen Devon Ranch and are having these kinds of outdoor experiences for 3 days and a couple of nights out in the wilderness and experiencing a lot of firsts. The first time for many, seeing the ocean up close, touching it with their feet and putting their toes in the water, to putting their toes and feet into a beautiful, pristine creek that runs from the Garrapatta watershed out to Garrapatta Beach too. Many of their first time sitting under a redwood tree and lying on their backs and gazing up through the branches as we do exercises, trying to imagine what it would be, what it would feel like to be a redwood tree living through the centuries, and also for many climbing a tree for the first time, to realizing that a redwood tree's pine cone is not the largest pine cone in the world. It's really small, and how these experiences feature into their lives moving forward, and how they are expressed through their nature journaling and through their comments, through their poems, and the creative expression activities that they do. So so for a lot of kids each year, hundreds of kids each year at these programs, these kinds of experiences with trees, where they begin to see trees and forests as not just an amenity or something that they can see from a distance, but they begin to see how they feature into their day-to-day lives and develop a relationship with them through just these different kinds of experiences, is the beginning of falling in love with outdoor spaces and falling in love with nature and building that relationship and having that sort of conversational experience between themselves and the natural world that they want to continue. And we see this continuously reflected in their behaviors out of the camps and in their desires to come back also.
Thank you, Kate. Again, thanks to all of you for participating in the call. It was just so nice to be able to have this kind of conversation. It's of course we would always love to and prefer to be together in a room or outside with all of you. But I think that this is a really nice alternative to be able to have this time with all of you. I guess I'd like to just close with one of my favorite quotes from the book for something to leave us all with, to just sort of reflect on as we end our evening together. This is a quote that came from Patricia Westford. So, real joy consists of knowing that human wisdom counts less than the shimmer of beaches in a breeze. As certain as things coming from the west, the things people know for sure will change. There is no knowing for a fact. The only dependable things are humility and looking. Good night, everyone, and thank you for joining the Big Sur Land Trust.